Okay, let's unpack this. Those uh, bizarre Nigerian email scams. We've all seen them, right?
Oh, yeah. The unbelievable stories, fortunes locked away.
Exactly. And corrupt officials needing your specific help. It's wild.
It really is.
And the question I always come back to is, why Nigeria specifically? It feels almost, I don't know, backward.
You'd think they'd want to sound more credible.
Right. Maybe claim they're, from Switzerland or somewhere less.
Yeah. Flagged. It does seem like a puzzle, like they're trying to sound fake almost.
It's a real head-scratcher.
Well, what's fascinating is that this apparent lack of logic, it's actually the key. You'd assume scamming 101 is be believable. Yet this Nigerian thing persists. So today, we're going to dive into some really sharp research. It's from Cormac Hurley at Microsoft Research.
Okay.
And the paper's actually titled, "Why Do Nigerian Scammers Say They Are From Nigeria?"
Gets right to the point.
It does. And it tells us to forget the easy idea that these scammers are just, bad at scamming.
Right, not just incompetent.
No. So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to get the strategic advantage they actually gain from using this whole Nigerian trope.
And what that tells us about the economics of these online attacks.
Exactly. We're not just taking it at face value. This research gives us a totally different angle.
Looking at it from the attacker's side. Efficiency, resources.
Yeah, and it turns out they face problems that are, surprisingly similar to the security systems trying to stop them.
How so?
Well, Hurley's work really flags this crucial point. Attackers also deal with wasted effort, what he calls false positives.
Okay, false positives for the attacker. Makes sense.
Think about the Nigerian scam process. It often involves emails back and forth, right? Maybe phone calls.
Yeah, interaction. It takes time.
Exactly. That's the scammer's time and energy. So a false positive for them is someone who replies, maybe emails back a few times, seems interested.
But then never sends the money.
Precisely. All that interaction, wasted effort, pure cost for the scammer.
Okay. And they also have false negatives too, I guess. People they miss.
Yeah, potential victims they just don't manage to hook. But the false positives are a big drain.
So it's not just blasting out emails.
Yep.
There's a real cost to chasing bad leads.
Absolutely. And think about the back end too, like managing the mules to actually collect money if someone does pay. That's work.
Right, not automated.
Yeah.
Requires people. Logistics.
Exactly. Which brings us to this idea of victim density.
Victim density. Yeah,
Yep.
What's that?
So picture everyone online. Only a tiny fraction are actually susceptible enough to fall for this specific type of scam and have money to send.
That small group is the density.
That's the victim density. And the research shows something pretty startling.
Yeah.
As this density goes down, fewer potential victims per capita, the number they can profitably attack drops off. Well, incredibly sharply.
How sharply? Like, give me a sense.
Okay, so one example in the paper suggests if you reduce the density by 10 times, say from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100,000, the number of victims they actually find might drop by 1,000 times.
Wow. 10 times fewer potential targets leads to 1,000 times fewer actual victims found.
Potentially, yes. It's a dramatic fall off. And this creates a real bind for the attacker, especially when that density is already low.
A bind how?
Well, to find enough victims to make it worth their while, they need really accurate targeting.
Okay.
But to learn how to target accurately, they typically need lots of interactions. They need data, which means dealing with loads of people who will never pay.
The false positives again.
Exactly. It's a bit of a catch-22. Need good targeting to find victims, but need lots of victims, including duds, to learn good targeting.
Okay, so this is where the crazy story comes in. How does making it sound less believable actually help? It seems like fewer people would even reply.
And that is the genius of it. That's the strategy. The ridiculous story itself. It's a filter. A very, very effective one.
A filter? How?
Well, think about who actually takes it seriously. Anyone vaguely internet savvy, anyone who's heard of these scams, anyone who might just Google it.
They hit delete immediately.
Instantly. The sheer absurdity repels almost everyone.
So you're left only with?
You're left with the people who, for whatever reason, don't see the obvious red flags. The most gullible slice of the population.
Huh. So it's like self-selection. They're not trying to trick everyone.
Not at all. They're trying to find a very specific kind of person. By making the scam so obviously a scam to most people, the initial email automatically weeds out nearly everyone except those most likely to believe it, ignore the warnings, and, crucially,
Actually send money.
Exactly. So yeah, the total number of replies might plummet, but the ratio of true positives, people who pay to false positives, time wasters, goes way, way up.
Wow. So that first email is their main sorting mechanism.
It's their primary classifier, as the paper puts it.
A classifier. Like sorting mail.
Sort of, yeah. It's crudely sorting people. Likely sucker versus everyone else. The goal isn't getting the most replies. It's maximizing the efficiency of finding paying victims.
So they're deliberately aiming for a low response rate, but a high conversion rate among responders.
Precisely. They operate in a way that focuses intensely on those high probability targets, even if it means letting lots of potentially viable but less naive people slip through the net.
And the way they write them all those, convoluted details and unbelievable scenarios.
Yeah.
That signals they're really worried about those time-wasting false positives. They really don't want to chat with people who aren't going to pay.
That comes through loud and clear. They are extremely sensitive to wasting effort.
Which suggests maybe the whole operation is more fragile financially than we think.
It could well be. They just can't afford to sink time into dead ends. The margins might be tighter than commonly assumed for many of these scammers.
Interesting. This also makes me think about defenses. The research mentioned something about diversity.
Ah, yes. Diversity as a defense. The idea is that if vulnerabilities are spread out across many different types of potential victims or attack vectors.
And not one big homogeneous group.
Exactly. If potential victims are fragmented across many smaller different weaknesses, the victim density for any single type of attack becomes very low.
Making it harder for the attacker to specialize.
Much harder. They'd need different tactics, different classifiers for each small group, and the research shows it's way less profitable to chase lots of small, diverse groups than one big, easy-to-target one.
So diversifying potential weaknesses across a population actually helps protect everyone, even if the total number of vulnerable people stays the same.
That's the implication. The paper gives an example like splitting a target pool into maybe 20 different categories could seriously slash the attacker's overall success rate because the density for each category is now much lower.
Okay, that makes sense. Lower density means more work for fewer rewards.
Right. Even if an attacker has a pretty good classifier, a good way to spot potential victims for one specific low-density attack, they'll still miss a huge chunk of the viable targets. Why? Because the cost of sifting through all the non-targets, all the false positives, just becomes too high.
The signal-to-noise ratio is just terrible for them.
Exactly. And it's also really hard to build super accurate classifiers for rare things anyway. You just don't have enough examples, enough data of successful attacks to learn from.
Which brings us back to the idea of intentionally messing with them, like scam baiting. People who pretend to fall for it just to waste the scammer's time.
Right. The research touches on that too, by deliberately injecting more false positives into the system.
Seemingly interested people who will never pay.
Yeah. You essentially drive that effective victim density even lower for the scammer.
Making their job even harder, even less profitable.
And forcing them to be even more conservative, maybe even more absurd in their initial emails to filter even harder.
Because of that crazy multiplier effect you mentioned. A small drop in density causing a huge drop in victims found.
Exactly. That example where 10x lower density could mean 1,000x fewer victims found, it really shows how sensitive these low-density attacks are to false positives.
So the big takeaway, the real aha moment here, is that the Nigerian scam isn't stupid. It's not a bug.
It's a feature.
Yeah, it's a feature.
Yeah.
A surprisingly clever, if cynical, strategy.
A filter. Designed specifically to zero in on extreme gullibility and slash the wasted effort of dealing with skeptics in an environment where real targets are scarce.
It's totally counterintuitive until you look at the economics behind it.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how, doing a deep dive like this can give you those surprising insights into everyday things.
Definitely makes you see those emails differently.
For sure.
And it makes you wonder what other stuff we see online, behaviors that seem irrational or inefficient, might actually have some hidden strategic logic. Maybe viewed through this lens of minimizing false positives or operating where targets are rare.
That's a really interesting thought to chew on. Where else does this apply?
Yeah. It's a whole new framework for thinking about online interactions, maybe even beyond scams.
Absolutely. And, we've really just scratched the surface here today. There's a lot more depth in the economics of online attacks.
So if you're interested, definitely check out that Hurley paper.
Yeah. The source material is fascinating if you want to go deeper.
Well, this was a fantastic deep dive.
Yeah.
Really eye-opening.
Definitely shifted my perspective, too.